Such a great program planned for you today, and we're really, really excited about it. So if you were with us last year, either in person or for the first time ever offered virtually, we combined Logility's 1-hour CLE and Baker & McKenzie's 1-hour CLE to give us the opportunity to tackle social justice in a 2-hour block instead of one. We've loved it, and I hope that you have all continued and will continue to try and break down inequitable barriers in this world. But today we have a new topic, and we've combined again with Baker and Logility, have put our resources and our 2 hours together to bring you a keynote speaker and panel to move us into the future workplace. And we are super, super excited about it. Our keynote speaker is unbelievably knowledgeable and just so incredibly engaging that you're just gonna love to hear her speak. The accent alone will keep you engaged, but the topic too. So Claire Haidar is a technology entrepreneur, an avid downhill mountain biker, which I would prefer that too. I mean, if you don't have to go uphill. And also the CEO of Winder, which is a company that's focused on redefining how organizations conduct work. Claire is passionate about human acceleration and workplace transformation, and she's fascinated by the intersection between systems and how humans behave. So that's going to be the bulk of the discussion today, which you'll find fascinating. She works with a diverse range of clients to focus on redefining the future of work across 3 areas: humans, workspace, and technology. Her address in the first hour and then the panel discussion in the second hour will challenge our status quo and give us some real practical guidelines to take back into our companies and into our personal lives, which, let's face it, now that we're in year 2 of COVID, are completely intertwined, so we need it everywhere. So with that, strap on your rocket fuel, as she likes to say, and be prepared to launch into the future. Claire Haidar.
Tracy, I'll join you in climbing up the stairs. Tall women have that advantage. Hello, everybody. It is honestly such an honor and a privilege to be here with you this morning. And my reason for saying an honor and a privilege specifically is because I really, really enjoy when I get invited to speak to hyper-focused groups of people. So you're all in-house counsel, you're all very, very focused in a very specific field. And the reason why I love that so much is because I get to deep dive into the work that you do. And so in researching for the panel moderation that's going to be happening later today, I've also literally spent a lot of time deep diving into legal journals to see a lot of the work that's been happening over the last year in preparation for today's topic. And I've really had fun doing that. I enjoy deep diving into things when I'm speaking to a specific audience. So Tracy and everybody else who invited me to be here, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to be starting with what is perhaps the single most embarrassing moment of my entire life. And I don't know if I will ever be able to top this moment. Start of this year, we're over COVID, we got our second vaccine shots for those of us who have decided to do it, and we have an amazing group of investors that have just come into our company and they've invested, and I am taking the lead investor for lunch. And we go to a very, very fancy restaurant with napkins, the whole la-di-da thing in Dallas, and we're looking at the menu, and we've got the champagne out because we're toasting the Rays, and we're talking about the future, and we look at the menu, and I order a salad, and waiter comes out, and in the interim, as we've been waiting for the food to come out, a whole lot of people, so this is a very cozy restaurant in Dallas Uptown, okay? So you can hear what's happening at the table next to you, and you can pretty much hear what's happening at every table in this restaurant, okay? And we order, and while we're waiting to order, a whole lot of family members and other business people that this investor knows walk into the restaurant. This wasn't planned, completely unplanned. And it's hello, hello, hello. Meet Claire, just invested into her company. We're very excited about this. We're here to celebrate this. And out comes the waiter and places my salad down in front of me. And I pick up a bottle on the table and I spray it all over my salad. It was hand sanitizer. First lunch out after COVID, hadn't been in public, better part of about 12 months, and I genuinely thought that that bottle was olive oil. Because I have an olive oil bottle at home, and it's a spray bottle. So why would the restaurant not have a spray bottle on the table? And Selwyn looked at me, and she was trying to figure out if she didn't know something about the bottle that I knew, and if she had always missed out that this was olive oil. And at exactly the same moment, that smell of the hand sanitizer just like emanated from the salad. And she and I just cracked up laughing, like the mascara was running down my cheeks. And it being a small restaurant and it being full of people that she knew, they were all like, what's going on? And so the whole restaurant knew that I had just sprayed hand sanitizer on my salad. I tell you this because we've entered a whole new era of chaos. And what happened to me that day in the restaurant is literally a micro moment that all of us have experienced on some level. I sent Tracy a message last night and I said to her, Tracy, what's the most embarrassing moment that's happened to you during COVID? I won't share your story, Tracy, but I'm encouraging you to go and ask her because it's hilarious. I nearly woke up the whole family laughing when I got her message, her reply last night. We've all had these moments. And the reality is that we are now in a world of chaos. The interesting thing about chaos, though, is that it is something that we innately don't like. We want to push back against it. We want to organize it. We want to restructure it. We want to put order to the chaos. Think about how chaos is referenced. Generally, when situations are messy, when you walk into a teenager's bedroom and it doesn't look the way you would like it to look, like this place is chaotic. When we walk into very busy places where things are just moving in all sorts of different directions, we reference it as chaotic. Interestingly about it, if you actually go back to chaos theory, the scientific chaos theory, it actually isn't disorganized. It isn't messy. Chaos theory explains to us that what chaos is a highly, highly connected, networked environment. So in your mind, I want you to think about literally nodes everywhere. And all of those nodes are connected. And the reason it feels chaotic is because every change happening at a micro level to every single one of those nodes impacts every other node. So every change that's happening to you is impacting your circle around you. And every change that's happening to them, you're feeling it. That's chaos. But if you actually go and put chaos under a microscope and look at it very, very closely, it is highly structured, highly organized, and in need of absolutely zero organization. And so the irony of the situation is that in order for us to move into this new era of chaos that we live in, a hyper-connected world, a globally connected world, where every aspect of everything impacts us. We're no longer isolated, not geographically, not politically. We're actually going to have to stop trying to organize the chaos. That's the mind shift. And it's huge. It's significant. But this is the interesting part. The problem and where we need to start solving it happens at a very basic level. And that basic level is a time problem. Now, I know before I start talking through the slide that it's going to be hard for you to see what's actually on there. And that's not a problem, because you're going to get these slides afterwards, and this is actually going to be a personal exercise for you. So I want to encourage you to take out a piece of paper in front of you and a pen or your phone or whatever you want to make notes on. And I want you to do a bit of a life calculation. Okay? And I'm going to share something pretty scary with you, because I did this calculation and it was really a light bulb moment for me. Okay? On average, it takes 70 hours per month to run a household. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about a big household. I'm talking about an average 3-bedroom household. Okay? To clean it, to get the dishes washed every day, to keep it semi-organized, do the laundry, 70 hours per month, okay? Parenting 2 children takes approximately 225 hours per month, okay? To do work, if you're working 8 hours, okay? 232 hours per month, okay? Sleep, if you're sleeping for 8 hours every day, is 240 hours per month. Exercise, if you're giving yourself that, is 10 hours per month. And then there's a bucket in there that I've just called personal time, okay? So this is you in your pajamas on the couch watching Ted Lasso. It's you spending time with the kids, not trying to clean their rooms. It's all of that stuff. It's taking a shower, a little bit of an extra long bath, going for a manicure, pedicure, trying to get a golf game in with the friends, going down to the local pub to have a beer, okay? It's all of that stuff. I've allocated 55 hours per month for that. And then there's commuting, and I've specifically put that in because we're trying to get back to a place of work, which is approximately 30 hours per month. Okay. Here's the reality, and this is why I want you to go and do this calculation for yourself. That is, we've got 720 hours per month, okay? So I've taken 24 hours over 30 days. You've got 720 hours per month. Here's the reality of what I've just painted for you. You're in deficit by 142 hours. That is 6 days short per month to actually just do normal life. I haven't included health crisis time. I haven't included family responsibility time. I haven't included social media time. If I go in and I add just the social media component, not any of the other things, that takes it up to a 202-hour deficit per month. Now go and extrapolate family and the parenting time out for larger homes, for more kids. Do you see how this deficit is growing? We're already 8.5 days short to live on a monthly basis. Now go and calculate that over the insanity that we've lived through over the past year, and you understand why we feel tired. and you understand that we are staring at a huge issue. Because as in-house counsel, inside a company, the brunt of this problem is going to become yours. This is companies' biggest legal risk. Employee burnout, employee turnover, and employee mental health risk, because those things impact the bottom line. There aren't really words for it. The emoji kind of does the talking here. It's why we feel the way we do. Depression rates are at an all-time high. Suicidal ideation is at an all-time high. Anxiety is higher than it's ever been. A new disorder has emerged in terms of identity disorder, which is a significant thing that's come to light in the last 18 months. And I want to share a very scary statistic with you that I've recently that's come to light for me because of work that we're doing with a company. 40% of the teachers who teach our children are medicating themselves just to get through the day. Now, if a teacher is needing to medicate themselves, imagine what that number looks like across the entire population. I tried to find it. I couldn't find it. I'm still digging for it. But if that's one small sample size, we're facing a crisis. Now, this is doom and gloom. This isn't a positive start. And I don't think the intention of me coming to do this keynote for you today was to paint doom and gloom. We're getting to the hope. Don't worry. Final doom fact that I'm going to put out there. For those of you who haven't just done a basic Google search around the Great Resignation, I highly recommend that you do. Literally just type into Google the Great Resignation. It's a reality that companies are facing right now. 40% of employees are churning out of companies. And when you go into manufacturing, okay, that number skyrockets to closer to 60%. Okay? The reality of that is that this is not just an after effect of COVID. This is our new reality. It's going to be a perpetual reality. And again, as in-house counsel, this is your problem. You're dealing with this. And so, with that backdrop and that very scary reality of this deficit of days that we're living in, where do we go? Do we exit? Do we try to tame the chaos, as we've always been doing? Do we try to organize? Do we just try to march through? Some of the things that we've been trying to do over the last year is, most of us have sacrificed sleep. It's the first thing to go, okay? So we're like, okay, I can sleep less and then I can get more done. The next thing that we tend to sacrifice after that is exercise. I go, I don't need to exercise. I can do that a different day. The next thing we do is we cut away the personal time because the kids and the family and the mom and the dad and the neighbor need us more than we're willing to give ourselves. Parenting has taken on a whole new level of time strap in the last year. And so we didn't really want to put more time in there, but we've had to, and so it's skewed that life calculation even more. We were lucky with the commute because that got taken away, but now it's being put back on the plate. And so we've got this juggling act that we're facing. What do we do with it? The first thing is we accept reality. And here's the reality that we need to accept. A productive employee moving forward is not going to give a company more than 4 hours a day. Let that sink in. No employee is going to admit this to you. None of us here are going to be willing to actually go and do the life calculation ourselves and realize that many days we're in this boat. Because as Tracy said at the beginning when she introduced me, life and work are no longer separate entities. It's all just one thing right now. You're working while you're living while you're parenting while you're working. It's everything. It's everything all in one, and it's not going to change. And so if we accept that reality, and if we go and we look at the life calculation as basic as what it is, and actually stare at that reality, because a human cannot live in deficit. We can, but we're going to get really ill, and we're going to get really sick. But if we look at that reality and face this new reality, we're able to start building from there. Okay? And so the next thing that we need to do, particularly as legal advisors to the companies that we work for, is we need to get really, really, really strategic with our C-level teams and our boards of directors about this whole going back to work policy. I'm standing here as a veteran of virtual work. I've built 4 startups. Every single one of them have been a virtual company. I've been doing this way before the pandemic. I've been doing this way before it was popular. There is no such thing as blended. It's an impossible mirage that you think is out there and that you think you can achieve. You can't. A company cannot be blended. And the reason for that is because an in-person company is fundamentally different to a virtual company. Everything about it. The values it takes to run it, the mind shift it takes to work in those 2 environments. Everything, absolutely everything. I'm talking about something as opposite on the spectrum as socialism and capitalism. That's how far apart those 2 realities are. And so as legal counsel, I want to really, really encourage you to make this a strategic mission. Because this is where companies are going to falter and really struggle in the coming years. And so one of the core things that companies are going to have to do is they're going to have to redefine themselves. Are they a virtual company or are they an in-person company? You can't be both. Okay? So let's recap. The first thing we need to do is we need to be realistic and accept the reality of the amount of time people can actually dedicate to work moving forward. The second thing is we need to go back to the basics of defining who and what we are as companies. And we need to not buy into the lie. There's a lot of froth out there right now. There's a lot of chit-chat. If you just type into Google, like future workplace strategies, all of this stuff about blended comes in. I want to challenge you. Go and look at the people who are writing that stuff. Have they run virtual companies? Have they run blended companies? Have they gone through the pain of trying to make that work? You're not seeing the people out there who are doing this on a daily basis talking about the pain of what it takes to try and achieve this and the impossibility of it. Those are the conversations you should be having. Those are the things you should be researching right now. And then the next thing that we need to do, and this again is something, I'm really sorry, this one's a little bit in the sunlight there, so I'm just going to share with you guys what's over here. What you're looking at is essentially the core essence of all the change management research that has been done over the years, okay? And I'm like way, way, way back to present day. Essentially, what change management science teaches us about what it takes to navigate a company, a team, a small unit, a family through change is 3 things, okay? The first thing is, particularly for you who can't see this, is leadership. The second thing is individual enablement. The 3rd thing is a system and a process. Now, this seems deceptively simple, but I want you to stop and think about this. Think about any change that you've had to transition, whether it was at family level, whether it was in a personal relationship, whether it was a major M&A transaction that you were involved in, okay? In most cases, change has actually only happened on one of these levels. Leadership bought into it and tried to make it happen, but the individuals were never enabled to go through that. Or it was a bottoms-up approach and individuals were really fired up about it, but leadership never really bought into it. Or somebody came with an amazing, brilliant new system and process idea. Leadership never bought into it, and the individuals were never enabled around it. That's the reality of what happens with change. We forge ahead and we want to make it happen, but we only touch one of these three areas. We don't touch all three. And what change management science teaches us is that all three of these things have to be working concurrently together at the same time for the change to stick and take root. And so if you just think of COVID as a practical example and moving from completely in-person work to virtual work, the biggest emphasis was on process and system. Do my people have the equipment to work from home? And what's our new communication system? That's essentially where the focus was. But leadership across the vast majority of companies today is still not decided on how they're going to go back to work. This is a change that is set up to fail from day one. And science and all the results around science has taught us that over and over and over again. And so, staying with the thing of change, what you're seeing on the board here is essentially, again, a cumulative graphic of change over the years. This is what change feels like to people when they're going through it. And what I want you to focus on is not the words. I want you to focus on the actual visual. Do you see that huge, significant dip? That's what we're all in right now. This is change. And so it starts at the top, and it feels amazing. And it's something that you're actually really excited about because you're seeing all the positives, and you're like, this is incredible. I can see myself doing this. And within seconds, like literally days, you plummet, and you plummet hard. And then you go through a very, very real uphill battle to actually get to a new reworked reality. And then immediately as you get to that new reworked reality, you plummet again. And the next climb up is not as hard as the first one, but it never ever quite takes you to the high that you started on. And so if we go to the points that I've made in terms of what do we do with this new reality of ours is accept the fact we're working in a deficit of days. Accept that people can no longer work the hours that we've been demanding of them to work. The next thing is, okay, understand that the biggest legal risk facing companies right now is that a new definition of how work is going to happen has to actually be defined. And the next thing is, make it your mission to understand the science of change and how it actually plays out on the ground. Because if you can understand that, you will be able to navigate the legal risks that arise because of it. Okay? And so going back to the doom and gloom that I spoke about in the beginning, okay, if we had understood science and change management at the start of the pandemic, we would have known that we were heading straight into a mental health crisis. Here it is. The curve's right there. The research was there way, way, way before we started on this journey. And we could have been better prepared. And instead of thinking about, do my employees have access to Microsoft 365 to be able to talk to me, we could have been more proactive about it. And so that's why the biggest responsibility from my lens, this is really just a personal opinion that I'm sharing with you today, but I genuinely believe that up to now, legal inside companies has not had the strategic place in the C-suite and at the strategic table that it's needed to have. It's been there, but it's been a protective mechanism. It hasn't been a transformative mechanism. It hasn't been leading the discussion. It hasn't been the forerunner to say, this is the reality, this is where we need to go. That's always been somebody else in the conversation's job. And I think more than ever, that is one of the biggest changes that needs to go and happen. And that was essentially why I'm so excited to be here, to be sharing this day with you. Because I feel I'm not standing in front of a room of in-house counsel at their general association meeting. I feel that I am talking to the people who truly have the capacity to make the change happen. And that's significant. So where to now? What do we do now? The very first thing here that we need to do is we need to go back and we need to work with our companies to completely redefine employee experience. Up until now, the way we've thought about an employee inside an organization has been the person you recruit, the person you onboard, the person who produces work for you, you performance manage, you compensate, perhaps you need to go through a disciplinary process, they exit out. That's the view. And it's very much been a functional process where we've gone, these are the things that we need to do for employees as an organization, and they give back what we pay them for, and the relationship terminates at some point in time. Think back a few years ago when e-commerce completely disrupted the customer experience. Think back to social media and how social media completely disrupted the consumer experience. Work has just been disrupted. And no longer can the employee just be treated as this person who comes in and goes out in exchange for some money. The new employee is truly going to start demanding, what is the experience that you're going to provide inside this organization so that I know whether my days that are currently in deficit are worth contributing, to this organization? Will I be able to be mentally safe inside this organization? I know that's unpopular. It's something that doesn't make us feel comfortable. I'm a millennial, and I get irritated with millennials. I come from Africa. I grew up really poor. I started working at the age of 12. I just want to shake some people sometimes, and I just want to say to them, you can't just always demand things. You've got to work for things. I struggle with that. But this is the reality. And it's no longer coming from a place of entitlement. It is because employees are going to realize that it is their only way to survive, because we're living in a deficit of days. It is now a necessity. A few years ago, it was a luxury. It is no longer that. And so, at a personal level, as in-house counsel, as external counsel to companies navigating this reality? What are some of the things that you're going to have to do on a personal level to actually really navigate through this? Because the people who lead this charge, the people who make this change happen, are the ones who need to be mentally toughest. You're going to have to get really serious about prioritization. Do you have 60 hours to spend on social media? You may, but do you really have it? Do you have 225 hours to parent? You're going to have to sit with that life son and ask yourself these questions. Forget about goal setting. It's going to change every single week. The revenue target's going to change. The headcount number is going to change. The legal risk is going to change. The innovation that you were working on at the start of the year, it's going to change. Last year it was changing quarterly. This year it's changing monthly. Forget that. You can have a mile marker kind of somewhere there in the distance to go, we're heading that way, but trying to break that down into nitty-gritty is a waste of time. And this, I feel, is one of the absolute biggest fundamental changes that's going to have to happen. As humans, we're wired to set the goal and live in dream state. I want to run the marathon. And so what gets you there is you have this picture of yourself crossing that finish line with the medal. But very seldom do we sit down and have a conversation with ourselves about the pain. The 5 a.m. wake-ups in snow. Mountain biking taught me this. I started mountain biking, and I realized that there was absolutely no way that I was going to be able to do a diamond slope on the Alps on that downhill bike if I didn't learn how to fall. And so I hit a place in my mountain biking where I said to my mountain riding buddies, I'm not going out on the trails with you guys anymore. I'm going to practice falling. And for 3 months straight, I actively injured myself. I rode over boulders. I rode into curves and roads that I'd never tried to tackle before. And I just actively did it over and over and over until one day I fell perfectly. And then I was like, I am now ready to go back to my riding buddies, and I know that I now have the next skill to go and start tackling the next run down the mountain. And this is what we're going to have to do. As in-house counsel, we're going to have to sit with our teams and say, if this is the mile marker that we're heading towards, what is the pain that we're going to navigate? Not how are we going to do it, what is the actual pain? And does everybody in this team and in this company understand that that is the pain that they're going to navigate through? It's a totally different conversation. It's fundamentally different to the ones that we've been having to date. We're going to have to get ruthless about blueprinting. If we're living in a deficit of days and we're allocating time to things that we don't actually have time for, you're going to have to start time blocking. And you're going to have to start saying to people, I am right now busy with this part of work, and I can't do this. Interesting statistic behind this. The technology that we run as a company is a data platform that analyzes where and how people work inside organizations. We track billions of tasks that are happening by teams every single day. And the number one issue that is so obvious to see in the data when you actually look at the visual of a digital production line of a company is that the number of tasks that an employee has to complete on any given day, so whatever they've listed inside a system as something that needs to get done for that day, versus what their calendar looks like, is two totally different things. Their calendar is back-to-back meetings, and in 82% of the cases, what's in their calendar is not associated with what's on their task list. It's simple. We're allocating time to things that we shouldn't be prioritized on. Because in focus group research with those employees, 100% of the time, the answer is the task list is actually the more important work, not the meetings that are in the calendar. Huge contradiction. Turn off the noise. We had a breathing exercise to start this session. And she spoke specifically about technology. I don't need to say more. We know this, we know this. We need to turn off the noise. Our brains need it. The neurological level, the way our brains are structured is, you have long-term memory, you have short-term memory, and then very importantly, you have working memory. If I was to ask you guys to raise your hands, I'm not going to do it, but if I was, how many of you would be able to say, I'm forgetting a lot more than I ever was before? I can't remember stuff. It's because your working memory is fuller than it's ever been before. And the way the brain works is neurologically we're wired to take information out of working memory and to place it into long-term memory or short-term memory depending on how we need to use that information. And the way working memory is structured is that it literally wipes the slate clean when it's full. It's just a holding place. It's not a place that we work from. And so we have more stuff coming in than we've ever had before. And literally from the time that I started this talk with you to the time that I'm going to end, that data has just increased in terms of the amount of data that we're exposed to. And so working memory is having to erase and clean, erase and clean, erase and clean faster than it ever has before. That's why you can't remember. It's not because you're getting old. Get the data. Get the data. You don't know how your employees are working. You don't know how you're working. And you need to challenge that. Get it. Because it's going to tell you some really scary, really beautiful, really interesting stuff. And it's in the data where the answers lie to how we can reinvent ourselves. And then, once we have the data, we can make it our mission to remove the distractions, because that's what we need to do. Moving forward, if we've spoken about the legal risk, the largest legal risks that are facing companies today, and if you buy into what I see as your primary mission moving forward, that this is your space to own, this is your conversation to own in the company, then this is where you start. You take the data and you go and you share that with your company. And then the way you start removing distractions is you start automating. And we're going to have a whole piece of our discussion about that later today when we bring the panel up here around automation and where that is currently happening in your guys' industry. But we need to get ruthless about this. My husband and I have really, really become ruthless about this in our own homes. And just to give you an idea, we have 12 different robots, and they all have names in our house. And so he and I have actually challenged ourselves to make this our mission. Because as business leaders, if this is the reality, I can't stand on a stage and talk about it if I myself am actually not doing something about this. And so my husband, being an absolute technology nerd himself, has said, okay, I'm game to try this. And so we try to automate as much of our lives as possible. And we do the same thing inside our companies as well. And then my final message for you today is, do not assume that you know how to work in a virtual company. You don't. We've never had to do what we've had to do in the last year. You've just gotten by. You're nowhere near thriving yet. And don't assume that the lessons learned in the last year are ones that you really should be taking forward. As somebody that has built successful virtual companies globally, I can tell you that most companies are doing it wrong, very wrong. And then, final thing is, trust the process. Go back to the example that I gave you about what chaos is. Stop trying to organize it. Stop trying to define it. Stop trying to put it in a box. It's connected, it's moving, it's its own thing. And it actually knows how to organize itself because it is already organized. And I want to end with another story. And this story is of me learning to fly. I'm currently a student pilot. And I'm just about ready to do my solo. Not quite, but I'm a few hours away from it. And I went out the other night for the first time for my night flying with my instructor. And for those of you who are not familiar with DFW, it's one of the busiest airports in the world. So the airspace is really, really busy, which makes it an amazing training ground because you get to do radio comms like in few other places, and you really, really get pushed to your limit to really learn how to fly. And just outside of the airport that we take off of, which is Addison Airport, there's Dallas Executive and there's DFW. And so you can't bust those airspaces. And if you are in those airspaces, you have to listen to tower. And I didn't realize this, and my instructor didn't specifically tell me this, because this is something that's really important for a student pilot to realize, is that your depth perception at night is entirely different to how you see things in the day, as in completely different, okay? So this table now in the daylight looks this far to me, and it's more realistic in the day. When you're looking at that same table at night, it actually seems much farther away than it is. And so we took off, and immediately, because these airports are so close to each other, it's like I literally just got into the airspace, and I'm basically preparing to do my first night landing at Dallas Executive. And I got totally disorientated. Like, I mean, I've flown this, I'm about ready to solo. Like, I've flown this airspace hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And I just got totally disorientated for that one simple reality. It was night, and I'd never flown at night. And my depth perception was completely off. And so, as a pilot, you trained to do a 360. And I just asked Tower, I was like, I need to do a 360. And I did my first 360, and I still couldn't figure out where I was. A little bit better than the first time, nowhere near where I needed to actually be able to do a landing. I did 4 360s that night. And that's what I want us to all remember tonight and today and every day moving forward from here. Give yourself a 360. We don't have to land the plane tonight. We're in completely uncharted water. And here's the interesting thing that flying has taught me. There are so many variables in a cockpit that when you're learning to fly for the first time, your instructor takes you up and you literally have to almost fixate on one single thing while your instructor is helping navigate all the other things. It is nearly impossible for a pilot, a new student pilot, to go up and to be able to do comms and navigation and all the other stuff that happens, even in an almost fully automated plane. And so it starts literally with things as basic as how you actually maneuver the stick. A lot of pilots want to jerk it like this, and you have to realize that it's actually the simple movement of a thumb. And so some lessons you're literally fixating just on your thumb movement, okay? And what happens with pilots, and it's really, really interesting because it happens with every single pilot who's learning to fly, is that at some point, and you can never ever know when it's going to happen, you take off and you're flying, and all of a sudden you realize that the instructor isn't flying the plane. You're flying it. And you're doing all of it. And it's this real epiphany of a moment that you have as a pilot. Like, I can still clearly remember it. I looked over, I was like, are you flying the plane? He's like, no, you're flying the plane. I'm like, oh, okay. And you carry on flying. And from that point on, all the dots have connected. The chaos came together and it became cohesive. And that's what I mean by trust the process. We're navigating chaos right now. We need to give ourselves the grace of multiple 360s in order for our brains, our teams, our companies, our economies to bring all the pieces together. It's going to happen. We don't need to force it, but we need to give ourselves the time. And so with that, I'm going to stop. We're going to take a break, and then from there, we're going to move into our panel. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, everybody, I think we're going to try to get started and keep everybody on schedule. So, first of all, I just wanted to thank Claire for the inspiring keynote. We knew she was going to be fantastic, and she certainly did not disappoint. We wanted to give some practical implications of Claire's talk, and so we've got a distinguished panel that's going to try to bring out some of the themes that we talked about around digital transformation, the changing workplace, and wellness. So I'm going to briefly introduce the panel, and then I will turn it over to Claire to moderate the session. To my immediate right, we have Eric Schultenhover. Eric is with Legility. He previously was in a law firm. He was a partner at Waller in Nashville. The most interesting thing from my perspective when I looked at Eric's bio was that he co-founded a beer brewing company in 2006, a company called Good People Brewing Company. So if you want to talk about beer and brewing, this is your guy. To his immediate right, we've got Dr. Eric Coram. I'm also fascinated with Eric's bio, and I'm going to talk to him about this a little bit later as a sports guy. Eric is a high-performance pioneer who introduced sports science and athlete tracking technologies to collegiate and professional football. He's worked with the NFL, Power 5 NCAA programs, gold medal Olympians, Nike, and the United States Department of Defense. Eric is also an expert in sleep and stress resilience, and he founded a company called AIM7, an app that turns wearable technology into healthy habits. So a man of many talents, and we'll talk about sports a little bit later. To his immediate right, we have one of my partners, Chrissy Katzenstein. Chrissy's recently new to Baker McKenzie, and we're incredibly lucky to have her. She's a partner in our employment and compensation practice and flew in from New York for this event. So Chrissy represents employers on a number of employment-related disputes, but her practice also focuses on the changing workplace, COVID-related issues, and all of the challenges that we're currently facing, a number of which were alluded to in Claire's introductory remarks. I don't know why I'm even going to try to introduce Alvin. You guys all know him, but I will do so anyway. To Chrissy's right is Alvin Benton, who, as you know, is at Capital One. Alvin is a board member here. He's actively involved in the community. he's kind of everywhere. So, Alvin goes without introduction, but Alvin, thank you for joining the panel and for sharing your insights. And lastly, we have another one of Baker's partners in our Chicago office, Adam Aft. Adam is a partner in our technology, media, and telecom practice group. Interestingly, Adam does a lot of work in the tech space, and I think he's going to bring a unique perspective to this panel because not only is he a partner in our law firm, but he actually works on secondment with one of our large clients and has spent significant time. He spends about a week a month with Apple in-house. So he's got a unique perspective where he, is counseling clients, but he's also seeing, digital transformation from the in-house perspective. So with that, I will get off the stage and I will turn it back over to Claire.
Is my mic on? Yes, it's on. Good. This is the piece that I'm really excited about because this is where you get to dig in and really, really get to the meat and the bones of your job on a day-to-day basis. So, Adam, I'm going to dive right in and I'm going to start with you. My talk raised this morning the importance of data and how critical that is. We know it's critical. We knew it was critical before COVID, but it is now more critical than ever before. And yet, data privacy is a stickier issue than it's ever been before. In all of the work that you've done, which a lot of it has involved data and the importance of it, whether it's statistics in the court, alternatively, what should we as in-house counsel be prioritizing at the strategic discussion level with regards to?
Great, thanks so much. I really enjoyed your talk. And as you mentioned, a lot of what I'm doing right now is focused on data, opportunities with data. As compute power has increased, as storage has gotten cheaper, it's really unlocked a lot of unique opportunities for data and data usage. But not to go full nerdy and superhero, with great power comes great responsibility. And so one of the keys as enterprises are working through these challenges with data is understanding how is the company thinking about data, how are you structuring those discussions. The data privacy landscape is ever evolving. We had the GDPR in Europe in May of 2018. We had California come online. We've got Virginia and Colorado coming online. We just had the China PIPL. All over the world, it's constantly evolving. And the question is, if perfect compliance and if perfect the way we use data is kind of a quixotic quest, where are you focusing? And the way that I typically work with clients is to really identify where are the highest and best value uses of data, and then identify what are the risks that are highest associated with that. So if we're going to be sharing data with another enterprise, have we considered the competition risk? If we're going to launch a new direct-to-consumer campaign, what have we done with respect to the use of those individuals' personal data? And rather than trying to pull on every little thread, think about what are we as an enterprise trying to accomplish with the data, and where can we focus in order to best use our limited resources, our limited time, and our limited energy in order to best use and manage that data.
Brilliant. It's a solid framework in terms of where you start. Right. You know what I mean? Because one of the things that I've definitely seen in working with in-house counsel, we have a few law firms that are clients of ours, as they're navigating this issue with customers, it's the customers have too much data. And it's either they don't know what to do with the data because they don't know how to handle the legal risk associated with it, or the other problem that they tend to have is they tend to, but they're looking at the data, but they're not understanding what it's telling them. And so this covers both of those, which is really powerful. Yeah. Eric, not Eric Horn, Eric on that side, microbrewing Eric. I'm going to move to you, and in the same vein as the topic that Adam has just discussed here, what are some of the biggest hurdles right now that in-house and external counsel are having to knock down inside companies?
Well, I think that data privacy, data security is a massive issue that companies are facing all over the world, certainly here domestically. following up in the theme of the conversation around data and trying to figure out, to your point, what to do with their own data, certainly what to do with their customer data, how to defensively delete it, how to automate the process around that, picking up on some of your themes from your discussion as well. Because I think you can put policies in place, but if they're not adhered to, then that obviously generates legal risk as well for an organization. So we hear more and more of our clients and customers asking us to assist with projects around defensible deletion strategies, implementing policies, and then figuring out ways to make those automated, because the reality is that people don't have the time to comb through the data that they have themselves and get rid of it and figure out what's important and not. And so I think there's going to continue to be a sea change in this data management role that in-house plays along with all the rest of the members of the organization, because the data is stored not just in legal, but obviously throughout the entire company. So it really is a challenge for the entire organization to get their hands around. And with the new regulatory regimes that continue to be promulgated around the world, it's just going to be something that all in-house counsel, I think, need to stay abreast of continuously, probably throughout our careers, because data sources continue to explode. I mean, right, every year you think, okay, we've wrangled data now. Well, no, there's now social media, there's now cell phones, there's now computers, there's now whole different ways of communicating with one another via symbols and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So, I mean, data sources continue to explode, and technology and process tries to keep up with it. But I think we're going to have to embrace the chaos, perhaps, and just figure out ways to automate our way out of the problem.
Out of the problem. That brings up an interesting question, which I'd like to ask you as a follow-up question. Do you see a time in the future where combining legal skills and IT skills is almost going to be essential? Like, it's almost going back to college level, it's almost going to become like a compulsory double major.
I think we're already there. I mean, in fact, I think the in-house counsel and outside counsel of the future has to be conversant in the tools that exist, because we're not, as people, going to be able to tackle the data problem, but just the continuing volume of work against the backdrop of what you discussed about with more limited work hours that people have. I mean, these tools really can empower people, but if you don't know how to use them, then a tool is only as good as your training, right? So in understanding throughout high school, college, professional development, professional education of how these tools work is going to be essential to manage your teams, to also deliver the product or the work product back to your clients. And if you're not able to do that, then perhaps you might find yourself in another line of work.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take a moment to pause here, and we're actually going to open it up for discussion so that we can get questions from you while at the same time having the panel discussion. I'm going to ask Alvin a question next, but while I'm doing that, I'd like you to really think about questions that you have for the panel as well. And I just want to check on my two mic runners in the room who will be taking mics to the audience. Are you there? Okay. Have you got a... Yeah. Okay, perfect. So if you guys can just get ready for that. And then can I also just specifically for the online community, Alessia, we're going to open up for questions. Can somebody just check Zoom link as well if there's any questions coming through from the virtual audience? Thank you so much. Okay, Alvin, my question for you is, there's a very real tension inside organizations right now around the prioritization of external legal risks and internal legal risks. And I think coming back to a lot of the points that I made in my talk, the reason for that is because there's more internal tension around employee experience, employee legalities, all of those type of things than there ever were before. And yet the external risks, as we've just heard, are greater threats than they ever have been. Where and how should in-house counsel teams working with external teams help companies to prioritize those ever demanding?
Yeah, I think at a very high level, there has to be a continuous feedback loop in understanding what areas can we as lawyers improve in, how can we help, how can we better understand what things are important to our businesses, but also recognizing that as we get that information, we need to be agile. We need to be able to adapt and receive that information. It's the same conversation, but it's data in a different form. It's as we receive data as individuals, how do we process that data and build processes and things around how to better influence our teams and how to lean into our teams. I think that's really like where the balance takes place. It's really like taking those external things, understanding them better, and internally ingesting those things to develop a process that addresses those things externally. So it's really like a loop. It goes back and forth, and you have to be able to continuously do it, because when you close off the communication or close off the opportunity to receive that feedback, then you don't know what you're not doing. You don't know if you're improving. You don't know if someone has a pain point. You don't know if someone needs you to do something in a specific way. So that's kind of my thought in terms of how to address that issue.
Companies have that feedback loop in place in adequate measure?
Yeah, it's interesting. The company I work for, we have an interesting kind of process agility, I don't even know how to describe it, feedback loop in place. And how we as a department have ingested that is that we've looked at what our business does in terms of measuring success, understanding pain points, being empathetic to different customer stories, customer meaning our business, also meaning external customers, and determining how can we measure that thing, how can we look at it consistently, and have constant conversations about how are we looking at that, what things we need to do to better influence our decision making and our engagement with our partners.
Just to jump in to add to that, because I think it's a really valuable point for the value that the in-house team can bring to the organization. We were doing a project with the World Economic Forum that they were looking at how do you unlock value from data and unlock within the enterprise. And they didn't have any lawyers in the room, and they said, well, this is kind of chaos, right? This is chaos. What do we do? And we timidly raised our hand in the back and said, well, gee, lawyers are really good at structured thinking, really good at organizing thoughts. And that resulted in we just launched this business data booster tool that kind of goes along exactly with what you just said. It helps organizations go through and see how are we facilitating that feedback loop, and how are we as lawyers within our companies enabling the business by contributing to the feedback loop, providing a structured way to think about whether it's use of data or otherwise, and really empowering the business rather than just being reactive.
Okay. I'm going to open up to you as an audience. Are there any questions? Yes. So can we have a mic up front here, please?
Thank you, everyone. So there's obviously the more data that a company is having in its data lake, let's call it that, there's risk associated with keeping that data, not knowing whether you are going to use it or not. The tension is, the legal folks always say, well, if we're not going to use this data, go ahead and delete it. Whereas the business people, and I see you nodding your head so you know where I'm going with the question, the business people are like, well, we don't know what we don't know, and we may actually want to go ahead and use this data. Meanwhile, every day, your data lake's getting bigger and bigger, exponentially. Would love your thoughts on how to kind of bridge that tension.
Excellent question. Really happy you raised it.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up. Yeah.
I'll give a brief response, but then turn it over to the rest of the panel. I am smiling because the business always said, we'd love to retain all data forever. What I found the most effective tool to be is lawyers are really good at asking questions. So just asking the business questions to really unpack a little of, you don't know what you don't know, but real talk, what do you actually think you might be doing with the data? What are the potential opportunities? And just going through that kind of lawyerly way of thinking and asking questions, whether it's a formal data privacy impact assessment or more of an informal process that mirrors that, really helps distill if there's a meaningful opportunity there, a meaningful business purpose for retaining the data, or it's just a little bit of a free-for-all, in which case data minimization would caution to say, okay, maybe we do delete some of that data.
Yeah, I certainly would agree with what Adam said, and it's been interesting. I think it in part it depends on who your client is and what industry you're in, right? Obviously, there may be data retention requirements that are regulatory driven, or perhaps there's more of a risk in your particular industry if you retain certain data versus getting rid of it on a regular schedule. I would say on balance, most of the clients that we speak to are erring on the side of purging now. I think maybe 5 to 10 years ago, there was more of an interest of retaining because maybe there's something in there that will help us in the future. But I think more and more clients are being burned by the random document that surfaces that for some reason was retained, and then all of a sudden the litigation changes, or the contract negotiation changes, or the dispute changes. So we're seeing more and more clients move that direction. And I try to analogize it to my own desk, which is a complete and total disaster and a mess. At least it still is, and it looks like it did 18 months ago. I've been back there 6 times to look at it. I know there's nothing on that desk now that I absolutely need at all whatsoever. I've lived for the last 18 months without anything that's on it. But it's still sitting there, right? And my inbox and all the data that I retain is no different than the mess that is my desk. And so this last 18 months has helped me to kind of formulate my own internal retention policy around that, and use that to discuss with clients and other people too. Have you looked at your desk for 18 months? No. Well, the emails that you have from 3 years ago probably aren't that valuable either. So maybe, putting in a retention schedule that gets rid of everything after a year is a good idea for your organization.
Yeah, I would just pick up on that point from the litigation perspective. I spend a lot of my practice litigating, and when a client says, oh, we keep everything, my mental bubble is like, isn't that just great? Because that is not what you want to hear, because inevitably that document lives in the things that were retained, or you have 15 system changes that have happened over time, and you're in the position of having to go back to each of those systems and try to pull the information that is deemed relevant. So I think from a practical litigation risk perspective, there's always an argument getting rid of information when you can isn't all that bad, and really asking those questions to balance that against what the business wants to do, and is there really a meaningful opportunity to use the data, or is it more likely it's going to cause us more of a headache than benefit us?
And I'm happy to share an in-house counsel perspective. I see a few colleagues in here, so this might ring true for those folks, but nothing feels better. I think it starts with the mantra that we're all or data stewards. We must be good stewards of data, like all of us. It doesn't mean us as lawyers, it means all of us, like individually. And nothing makes me happier than when a business person asks the questions that I would normally ask, because they recognize that they should be good stewards of data, and that they should have the decision. And then we'll kind of pressure test it and have a conversation about it. And sometimes their barometer is off, but at least they're asking the question. At least they're taking the responsibility, in addition to what the legal department and compliance department, et cetera, is putting out there as acceptable. So.
Yeah. I think if I can circle back, to kind of bring everybody's points together there, the word you hit on there is stewardship. And I think the piece that coming back to the point I made in the talk as well, is this is not a pretty topic. Data is actually telling us a lot of stuff that's not pretty to look at. And from a legal perspective, putting that stewardship lens on, that's a mechanism, and it's a conversation that actually has to happen with the company to say, if we start surfacing this data, if we actually start correlating it, it's going to show us things that we won't necessarily like, we won't necessarily believe, and we won't necessarily have the resources in place to address the problem. And so not only is it about stewardship of the data, but it's about stewardship of the problems that are going to have to be solved because of what we find. And I think our conversation later is definitely going to go to that. So just want to check, is there another question in the audience before I move on to the panel? Not at this point. Okay. Alessia, I'm going to ask you to signal to me if there's questions coming through on the Q&A on Zoom. Okay. Eric, I'm going to be turning to you right now. So let's forget the company lens for a minute, and let's look at really real human lens, which makes all of this quite messy at times. For those of you who don't know this, Eric actually has a PhD sleep. So you're sitting in the presence of somebody who has literally done the deepest level of possible research on sleep. Eric, a question for you. Is sleep the simple yet profoundly magical bullet to a lot of the issues that we're facing?
100%.
Tell us why.
Thomas Dekker was an English dramatist in the 1700s, and he said, sleep is the golden chain that ties our health and human bodies together. And there's 3 things that happen during sleep. As I was thinking through your talk, which was fantastic, by the way, 3 things happen that I think everybody should be aware of. Number 1, that's when your body's tissues regenerate themselves. So hormones like growth hormone release, testosterone. That's when your body physically recovers. Number two, it's when your brain literally purifies itself. There's something called the glymphatic system in the brain. We've just found this out. You've heard of the lymphatic system in the body? Well, the brain has its own sewage system, and it flushes out metabolic waste products when you sleep, some of which are associated with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And so if you've ever woken up after a bad night of sleep and you felt like you had a foggy brain, it's literally because you have junk left in your head. And then the third thing is, and I think this is what will hit home with everybody, that is when learning and memory consolidation actually occurs. So imagine that you're studying for your boards again. And I'm sure that brings up a lot of really bad feelings. But you put a lot of hard work in during the day, or your boss comes and says, hey, you got to really upskill yourself on this. During the day, neurologically, some things are released in your brain that say, hey, in your brain, in these little neurons, like this needs to be learned. But when you go to sleep, those neuronal connections are actually strengthened. Your brain actually expands and contracts. It's kind of crazy. And so that doesn't happen unless you get restful and fulfilling sleep, especially like deep sleep. And so yes, like you're not going to be able to be adaptable, be resilient, learn fast, and be your best unless you're getting consistent, restful, and fulfilling sleep. And a lot of people are like, well, great, I know that. Yeah, I need to get 7 to 9 hours, but I just don't feel like falling asleep. And if I could give you one tip to take home today, it would be this, like your sleep and your quality of sleep begins with the first thing that you do upon waking in the morning. You see, we live inside now, but our bodies weren't designed for that. Your body is anchored on something called a circadian clock, which is a 24-hour rhythm. Most of you have probably heard of this. But that's anchored by a time giver, and the primary time giver is the sun. And new neurological research has found that when you see sunlight in the morning, especially it has to be before 9 a.m., it anchors your entire circadian clock. There's special cells in your eyes that can sense a special quality of light. And it sends a signal to this thing at the top of the roof of your mouth called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, okay? That sends a signal to every cell in the body that it's time to be awake and alert through cortisol and through a body temperature change. And then it kicks off a timer that says 12 to 16 hours later, increase melatonin, the sleepy hormone. So literally, if you can just wake up in the morning and somehow, and through a window, this is 50 times less effective. So getting sunlight through a window is not how it's going to work. But if you can just go outside for a couple minutes and get some direct sunlight, 2 minutes to 10 minutes, it will literally anchor your entire circadian process. You'll feel more alert during the day, and you will naturally want to fall asleep at night. And so all the things that you're talking about being productive during the day, you're totally right. Like 4 hours, I even told you, like, I try to get 2 90-minute sprints in a day. And if I can get 2 90-minute sprints in a day, you'll get more accomplished than most people. But that's all predicated on biologically how awake are you. And it all starts with your relationship to the sun. So yeah, I took 2 pages of notes today. Hope everybody was paying attention because what you're talking about is affecting us all.
And the reason why I've specifically asked Eric to be here today and to be part of this panel is because I want to ask a very controversial question. I'm going to throw it open to the whole panel. We're in an era where medical data privacy is totally being thrown wide open, okay? I've literally, as a CEO, had a conversation with an employee about it this week, one of our senior leaders in the company. He doesn't want us as a company to ask the question of our team, have you been vaccinated? Okay? There's the real world example right there, okay? HIPAA compliance, all of these things, I mean, we all know that. We're sitting here, this is our reality. But the interesting thing is that if you look at where the consumer world is, so if you look at where Eric's world is, okay, our athletes and people on that side of the spectrum, not the employee spectrum, are being graded, judged, selected for their physical well-being and their physical health, okay? My question is, at what point is that going to start entering the corporate world and essentially completely change how we recruit people and how we determine what best fit employees are for our companies. And I'm asking this question, and I'm literally throwing it out there because it's something that as in-house counsel, working with external counsel, we cannot ignore, because we're moving into an era where our people are going to be working next to machines who don't have medical challenges. And it's a major, major factor that we can't ignore. So Chrissy, I'm going to ask you to open it up for us, and then I'd love the rest of the panel to weigh in.
Yep, absolutely. I think the last 18 months for every employment lawyer has been very fascinating, because 18 months ago we were talking about, can you take somebody's temperature when they walk in the door? Can you ask them if they've coughed in the last 48 hours? Can you ask them if they've had chills? And we were all really nervous about it and thought, how are we possibly going to do this? And now we have medical records, and where are we going to put them? And what are the data privacy implications? And now we're in a place where we're talking about vaccinations and mandating those, asking for proof of vaccinations. Not just here in the US, we have clients who are doing this all around the world in dealing with data privacy and restrictions globally. And I do think that at some point in the process, we all just became very practical and made sure that we were doing things that made sense from a safety and a health perspective. But it becomes a bit of a slippery slope, and I think that's the issue Claire's raising is one that could be, where do we draw that line, and what does it mean to be the best fit employee from a health perspective, and are we willing to go down that road? And I think we have to deal with the reality that with all of these questions we've been asking our employees has come tremendous pushback from employees. So there's also a set of employees who don't think that it's any of their company's business to know these pieces of information. And I do think there's a balance there between understanding and needing to know, and then understanding and asking for a purpose that may not be as imperative as public health. And that's where I think we'll see even more pushback from employees, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of companies out there are going to be thinking more about. What can we ask? What can we learn? Because we've now opened the door to those types of questions.
Yeah, I already crossed this chasm. This is so I had no idea you were going to ask this. And so I wrote on two things. I was working in the NFL for the Houston Texans, and the NFLPA, which represents the players, was pushing back on monitoring. Okay, so I was a sports scientist, and so we were tracking all sorts of stuff. We track in-game, we track all sorts of stuff. And there were some things that could really help the players. And so I went to internal counsel. I'm just replaying this in my mind. I was like, listen, the only way that we can help these guys is if we drop legal documentation, that there's only two people that can see. We can see aggregate team data. Myself and the head of sports medicine can see individual data, and we're going to give them legal documentation where basically they can sue us. And they're like, let's do it. And we saved careers. We changed lives. We had guys that had obstructive sleep apnea that if they hadn't been doing the sleep testing, their careers would have been injured. They would have been hurt. We helped with mental health issues. I mean, all sorts of stuff. And now that I own AIM-7, which I saw a lot of Apple Watch wearers. We take data from your Apple Watch and turn it into healthy habits. One of our core values is stewardship. It was actually the first core value that I wrote down, because we have to be great stewards of your data. And as you think about from a corporate perspective, like I've had a lot of companies reach out and be like, hey, how could we use this? I'm like, hey, would you want a dashboard for the organization? But the individual's data needs to be kept with them. And we need to keep that secure. Like maybe they can share it with somebody that's like a psychologist in-house. Because you can now, I don't know if you guys have checked out Apple Health, but you can link your medical data really quickly. And then when you give permissions for an app and you say all, guess what you're doing? You're piping all your data to them. And so you just got to be really careful. I'm always thinking about a user's perspective and maybe an employee's perspective of there's a lot of great tools that could be helpful. But it's our job to steward that data really well and to create walls, very strict walls, where like maybe the organization goes, wow, I got access to this and our employees are starting to burn out. What do we do? How do we help them? How do we adjust? But I don't need to know how Rashawn or Carol or so-and-so is doing. Like that's their privacy. So that's just my thoughts on it. We crossed it in the NFL, and I'm taking that now into the private sector.
I think, Eric, though, just before the rest of the panel weighs in, I think the issue that this group of people face is, and I'm talking very personally here because I am a CEO, I'm the business person looking at this group of people going, but I want the individual data.
Yeah. You have to recalibrate your expectations. Sorry, I didn't mean to come across that way. But you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, Claire, we need to do a 360. Yeah, it's unethical. And I understand the draw, because you want to know how so-and-so's doing. But if you put in the right practices to begin with, if you're adjusting and you create agile systems that are adapting as the world's adapting and as your employees are adapting, guess what? You're going to have that competitive advantage. You're going to have a crew that's thriving and that wants to be engaged, and you're going to get more done with less time. But if they don't trust you, then you're going to have a lot of employee turnover, and then your whole thing's going to crumble. Sorry. That wasn't you. That was everybody.
So there's your talk track for your next CEO discussion. Anybody else on the panel?
Just picking up on that theme, I work with clients a lot on data ethics, and it really is just taking the question one step further. So you might come to me, you raised HIPAA, you might come to me and say, what can we do, right? Is this protected health information? Is this not protected health information? The key next question to ask when you're thinking about it from a data ethics and from a trust perspective is not what can we do, but what should we do? And that's that really essential next level that in-house counsel can really add a ton of value by asking, because it's not just the, hey, CEO wants to do it, can we find a way to get to yes? But it's pausing, challenging, and asking the question exactly as you just did, but what should you be doing? How should you be taking that 360?
There's an empathy component to that. I recall addressing a similar situation, and the question I had to the business was like, if you were in that seat, how would you feel? If you were the person that was receiving this message or getting this information, or the company was retaining that information, how would you feel? And that forces them to think a little bit harder about the decision that they're making, because, you know, what's good for us should be good for the other consumer. That's where stewardship comes in, is to think in that way. So.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good segue to Chrissy. I'm going to point a question here at you. It's, if you look at how employee law has been completely disrupted in the last year, can you paint a bit of a picture for us in terms of some of the major evolutions that still need to happen that haven't yet happened in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we all experienced in March of 2020 was a rush to go remote, and we all did that the best way we could without opportunity to strategize for it, plan for it, and then implement. It was just like flipping a switch. And so I think the real challenge that we're facing with a lot of clients right now is how do we actually put a framework to this new world that we're in that looks very different from what it looked like 18 months ago. And it is tremendously challenging because I think there's this tension that it's almost an identity crisis for our clients. We were an in-person company, and that is who we are. And now there's overwhelming employee bases who think we want to be remote or hybrid remote. And everybody's sort of landing where Claire told us we'll never be successful, which is in this world where we're both in person and remote. So most clients are saying we're going to be 3 days a week in person, 2 days a week remote. And it's really sort of the worst of both worlds in the sense that all of your data is going to be exposed in people's homes, potentially exposed going back and forth from the workplace. And there's really a lot of, I think, potential pitfalls that we haven't sorted through yet. So I think going forward, that's where we're going to really try to be bridging a lot of gaps, is saying, number one, if this is really not a workable solution to be having these hybrid workforces, how do we overcome that? How do we land as one or the other? And then what are the potential openings we're creating by switching what we've looked like? So if we've always been an in-person remote or an in-person workforce, and now we're going to be remote, that's going to totally change a lot of aspects of employment policies, data security, data privacy. So I think there's going to have to be a reckoning at some point, but it will be interesting because there is an overwhelming desire to be a hybrid company at this point.
Yeah. Agreed with that. Eric, I think that's a perfect segue into your area, specifically around automation, where you said it, we're already there. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that if you just look at the work management tools that we use, if you just look at something as simple as Microsoft Teams, for example, one of the most basic tools out there right now, those type of systems and platforms are going to become the biggest vessels of automation. Like that is the first frontier where the bots are essentially going to come and start doing the work. So my question to you is, from that perspective right now, can you share with us where the automation is currently happening specific to legal?
Yeah, great question. And you are right. I mean, it's interesting. Legal, I think, within a lot of organizations historically has always been the tail wagging the dog. It's a cost center, and again, maybe doesn't always have a seat at the table. And other aspects of business have automated before legal has automated. And so you see sales teams automating through Salesforce. You see accounting teams automating through NetSuite, Oracle, SAP, the big ERP systems and things like that, which are bringing process automation, robotic process automation, implementing new AI technologies as well. And within legal, the only area that's seen significant technology disruption over the last 15 years or so has really been in the, maybe some matter management software and some tools around e-discovery and litigation, which have incorporated artificial intelligence and have really made that litigation side of the practice change considerably. Over the last 18 months, the division that I helped to lead at Logility is called Enterprise Legal Solutions, and we really focus in on contracts and due diligence and transactions and things like that. And we've used, our team has used that 18 months to really go out there and look at a lot of the new tools that have been developed in the last probably 24 months or so around contracts and due diligence and things like that. And what is now available in the marketplace, really as of the last 6 months, and I think what we're going to see over the next 18 to 24 months is very transformative in the area of contracts and due diligence as well. With tools that really reduce a lot of the menial tasks around contract drafting and negotiation, things like that, incorporating your company's fallback provisions and playbooks into the front end of the contract process through software, negotiating contracts in very collaborative environments. I mean, if anybody wants specific names, I'm happy to give some specific names, either now or later. We can talk about it. But it's just amazing to see how these tools are learning from your prior negotiations, incorporating in, again, playbook and preferred language into the tools themselves, suggesting language, really speeding up the process, and again, giving the lawyer back some time to spend doing other things, to be more present with the business, and to be less of a scrivener. I think that's going to have a massive impact on the contracting function within your organizations in the next, 12 to 24 months for sure. And then on the diligence side, you are seeing much more robust tools that are going in there and able to automatically abstract data from legacy contracts, pull those into systems so that you need fewer lawyers doing the menial tasks, perhaps more lawyers as outside counsel advising on the deal, and working more strategic aspects of transactions as well. So I think it's going to be empowering. It's going to be very disruptive, I think, to lawyers who've historically relied upon billing hours and doing menial tasks to generate revenue. I think that's a whole other topic of conversation. And companies, I think, are going to need to decide, do we need as many people in-house? Do we want to have more people in-house? What do we want to have our in-house people doing? Because they're not going to be doing as many of the menial hours. And as a former practicing attorney myself, I'm actually general counsel for the breweries too, so I still do a good bit of legal work. I don't like reviewing contracts. I don't like reading those things. It's boring. Who likes that? I mean, I didn't go to law school to do that. I went to law school to sit with my business partners and figure out, like, what's the solution to this problem? And I think these tools are really going to allow us to do that, but it is going to be very disruptive to people's, current work environments and worldviews, perhaps. Yeah.
Alvin, I want to direct a question to you because this segues really well into your area. You're in-house counsel in a highly regulated industry, which creates barriers that other companies can go into sooner than you guys can. talk to us a little bit about that and how you actually see that disruption accelerating, but also accelerating inside your guys' organization. Because I think, you know, you're in banking, but there's other very highly regulated industries as well that can learn from that.
Yeah, we were having this conversation earlier. You know, there's a very delicate dance that we undertake, at least in the financial services industry, because if you look around, like fintechs are just popping up like crazy, and innovation is just all around us. So as I have the conversation with my business partners, it's all about leaning into innovation. You know, what can we do? How can we get smarter? You know, the data conversation is always permeating there as well. And, you know, I hate to always be the person to say, hey, don't forget we're regulated, like, you know, calm down. But I do recognize that we also, as lawyers that support these businesses, have to at least attempt to be facilitators of change, and that we have to kind of look at the marketplace that we serve, the consumers, the products that we make, and understand, like, I mean, really, I keep using the term like empathy, but what works best for our consumers, and how can we enable our businesses and our partners to develop products and tools that help our consumers. And then we back ourselves into kind of saying, okay, well, what is the regulatory environment that we're looking at? But that there has to be a certain amount of freedom that you give the business to kind of dream big, and then you kind of provide the parameters around, okay, we've done it, here's the dream, it looks great, how can we, you know, fit this into something that fits our regulatory environment? And it's a challenge, because every day, you know, there's new precedent popping up, there are different issues popping up, there are new companies popping up that are doing the same things that you guys are doing, but you just have to be smart and you have to be flexible.
Around that. Another question from the audience. Is there anybody that has a question? Yes, over here, Alessia, please. And then Alessia, while you're taking the mic to him, has anything come through? Nothing online? Okay, no problem.
In your presentation, you said that being a blended company was an impossible mirage. I think there's a lot of companies that are headed towards that impossible mirage. I'd be interested in your view and the views of the panel as to why that's so, or whether the panel agrees with you or disagrees.
Okay. I'm going to leave mine until the end. I'd love you guys to weigh in, specifically from what you guys have actually been seeing play out on the ground. Who's going to go first? Chrissy?
I can jump in with what I've been seeing. I mean, I think the reality, speaking very candidly, is that it's an appeasement strategy that has to exist right now while clients figure out, are we going to allow remote to persist, or are we going to be in person? Because there is a sense, I think, among leadership, let's get everybody back in the office. This is where we're most productive. This is how we've always done it. And then an employee base where 60% of employees say they'll quit if they have to go back in full time. And so I think that the in-house lawyers have found themselves in a very uncomfortable position of trying to satisfy the business while at the same time ensure that there isn't this tidal wave of people who walk out the door. And so I think that it's being viewed as a Band-Aid, candidly, at this point, where clients and companies are trying to figure out what is actually going to work best. And is this really going to be a possibility where we can have some portion of our workforce being remote and the rest of it being in person, or some combination of those things? But it does raise a host of questions and I think recalibrations that will need to happen about what does it mean to treat people fairly now? If you have some people remote, some people in person, what are you going to do about compensation? If I'm in Idaho working remotely, are you going to cut my pay because I used to be in the Bay Area? So I think that we're just, dipping our toe into the problems that could arise. But at this point, it's, I think, viewed as a way to slowly ease back if the idea will ultimately be to be in person.
I would look at it as a lot of uncertainty. I don't have a great answer as to whether it would work or not. I hope you do. But my view is, if as organizations we can embrace transformation and embrace places where we can succeed, whether we're remote, whether we're in person, whether hybrid works, if embracing that transformation is a way that we can focus and still unlock some value. So using the types of tools you were talking about, that's like a new way of thinking about how we work. It doesn't really matter if we're in person or virtual if we're using those tools. But the question is, how are we interacting with those tools? Are we using a bunch of lawyers, or are we effectively using legal project management as a way to unlock those tools? So that's where I think there's a lot of value from focusing energy on, can we embrace that transformation to effectuate change? And then I'll set aside the much more thorny question of, if that's in person or hybrid, and how we get there. So I'll leave that for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give the lawyer's answer. I think it depends, right? I think it depends on what your role is within the organization. I actually think it is possible, but again, it's going to depend on your role in the organization, the type of task that you're doing, and that may change, right? It may not be the same task that you're doing every single day. You may be doing a more menial technical task, leveraging a tool or something like that that's perfectly suitable for remote work. One of my roles within the company is business development. I'm dang glad to see you all here today. This is the first trip I've taken, other than last year's at Dallas ACC, that was actually business focused where people showed up. That's still important. It's still going to continue to be important. Talking to people, seeing people is important. I mean, we're human, we're animals, right? Like, we're not supposed to just be sitting there by ourselves all day, in my opinion. I'm not a scientist, but I find this refreshing. I'm going to meet new people here today. Hopefully that's going to turn into new relationships. That's still how business gets done. And it's going to continue to be done that way in the future. We may not travel for just travel's sake anymore. We may not just like people used to do, like, hey, let's just get together for dinner. But I do think people are going to get together to close a deal, to have check-ins and things like that are important. We may prioritize and reduce the non-important stuff, but there's still going to be a need for this. So I think it's possible, but it just kind of depends on what you're doing that particular week or month or day.
Great. Eric?
Yeah, so I'm a curious person, and working in team sport my entire career, like, could you imagine asking your favorite NFL or Major League Baseball team to work remote? The answer is no. It's not going to happen. And so, like, as I'm building a company right now, like, I'm thinking, like, I want to have the best team environment possible. So I have a podcast called The Blueprint, and I reached out to Dr. Michael Platt at Wharton's Business School. So he runs the neuroscience initiative across business, across medical. He has a fascinating book called The Leader's Brain. I highly recommend it for everybody. You can listen to the podcast if you don't want to read the book. But he talks about connectivity amongst teams. And we even discussed, like, how do you connect with somebody on a camera? Like, the way that you set the camera neurologically is going to change how you connect. So I have like a DSLR, super high resolution. I put it right, I'm like looking into the lens. Where you have like that psychotic person that's like coming at this angle. Like, you're like, what in the world is, how am I connecting with the side of your head? I don't get this. But these are things that we have to think about. Like, I'm hiring developers. I can get better talent. Somebody that just wants to stay in Cincinnati, Ohio, I'm like, great. But we got to create mechanisms to create real human connection. And there's hormonal things like oxytocin when you get into a communal environment where you feel this connection. And so, and it goes much deeper than just like, hey, you're my friend, Eric. It's like I feel a bond here. And great teams work like that. So if you're going to be remote, you better start thinking about a little bit deeper level on the scientific standpoint of how are we going to format things? Are we going to have standards for I made everybody on our team turn their cameras on. I know that may upset people, but I was like, I got to see you. And guess what? All of a sudden, our engagement went up. People started, like, we open up on Fridays, we celebrate things, and people start talking about their kids, and their kids hop in their laps. And it's like, now it's like, I know you at a way different level. And so it's something I'm struggling with as we start looking to the next round. And like, I love a team. I love a team. I'm a coach inside, and so like, I'm like, maybe, so I'm so glad you brought this up because now you've challenged me. But it's easier to hire good talent because they can stay where they want.
So let me rephrase what I shared this morning. The hybrid is the impossible mirage. What you need to do to make it not an impossible mirage is you need to define what your culture is. So let's take a bit of a step back in terms of how we define company culture in years before COVID. The reality is that we actually left a lot up to the building to do that for us, okay? And just think through practically what I'm saying here. If you walk into a huge open office space, huge glass windows, etc., it sets a certain tone inside that team. Whereas if you walk into a basement type structure, very closed, very little light, etc., and there's people working in that environment, it sets a certain tone. And the way companies have defined culture in a traditional sense, pre-COVID, was that it was the set of values that we feel drive our behavior. And so you onboard an employee and and that was the biggest tension that always existed. It's like, is this just something that we have on the wall, or is it actually how we operate? And the rest of the culture, we literally left up to the building and the people inside the building for that definition to happen. Okay, so if the canteen happened to be over there and the meeting room happened to be over here, how that created interconnectivity between people, we never thought about it because we just let the canteen and the meeting room do the work. The interesting thing that happens with virtual, to Eric's point, is that absolutely every single thing has to be thought about. Who thought that we would have to be thinking about a camera lens angle and how that impacts work? That's the reality. And that's why it's an impossible mirage. Because the way people connect, get work done, and actually produce things in an in-person environment is completely different to a virtual environment. Okay? And there's pros and cons to both. And the reality is the reason why we're trying to get back to what we knew work to be was because we allowed the buildings to define the culture. Culture is not what we thought it was. Culture is the collective set of behaviors, the way teams mentally make decisions together to produce outcomes. That's culture. Pause there for a minute. I'm going to repeat that because it's a profoundly different way to think about culture. Culture is not what happens inside the building. It's the way the team collectively come together to produce an outcome for a customer that becomes revenue for you. How you do that virtually and how you do that in person are completely different. And so going back to in person is the easy cop-out here. Because you can just revert back to letting the meeting room and the canteen's position define the culture for you. Going into virtual means that we literally have to go back to the drawing board and redefine how we're going to generate revenue as a team. And every single thing. So as you would architect a building and decide where you're going to place this and where you're going to place that and why it's going to be like that and why the windows are going to be facing this way, you have to architect a virtual culture. And that is exceptionally hard work because we don't have best practices to lean on. If you look at the number of companies like ours who have been running virtual companies, we're in the minority, we're mostly in the technology startup space, and therefore the sample size and the data set can't really be used and extrapolated across my data and what's relevant to my team is very hard to extrapolate and go and apply to a manufacturing company that has, or even a hospital that's 200,000 employees. It's not the same beast. And that's why it's an impossible mirage. And if you think about how people handle change, the knee-jerk reaction is, go back to what was comfortable. Your employees have tasted virtual life. They're going to go back because they think they miss it. And trust me, being able to do the laundry at 11 a.m. instead of at 7 p.m., and I actually want to be drinking a glass of wine, has a much larger pull on your business than you realize. It's genuinely, it's fact. And so coming to the point that Eric said, not Eric Coram, but other Eric, is that we need to realize, microbrewing Eric, we need to realize that connecting hasn't gone away. Building relationships and actually having fun being in a room with each other hasn't gone away. And so that shouldn't be what's driving culture definition, okay? It should be, as when you're architecting a building, you should appropriately be thinking through, how do I get business done? How do I get a team to solve customer problems so that I can generate revenue? And appropriately assign spaces in which that gets done. And so absolutely, we will still connect. But work will no longer ever happen in an office the way it did before. We're going to try, and we're going to fail. Last question for the day.
First of all, Claire, I neglected to thank you for your earlier presentation. It's the best that we've had since I've been here, and
Thank you.
it's specifically giving us frameworks and how to think about this information is very helpful. My question is for you, Dr. Eric. I'll call you doctor. You know, it was very profound what you talked about when you started talking about the brain. And I started realizing that the information you were sharing to me, I'm like, wow, that's really valuable. That data is not democratized. You simplified it, because whenever people want to talk about the brain, they make it so complex. But just talking about sleep and the brain, I feel like that information, so many people can benefit from it. How can people go about trying to learn and understand this neurology in a much easier way? And just, you mentioned your podcast, or you mentioned, read the Leader Brain. But it just seems like it would be so helpful for people to know, hey, you know what? If I slept a little bit more, if I got into the sun a little bit more, et cetera, it could really transform my life.
Wow, that's a beautiful thing. Like, the real sign of intelligence is if you can make the complex as simple. In your world, like I have lawyers. I'm like, hey, listen, like help me out here. Tell me, make it simple. That's why I've started my company. That's why I left sports. I felt like there was a lot of people I knew, like I do jiu-jitsu, and people come to me to jiu-jitsu, and they're like, hey, Eric, how do I do this? How do I do this? And so I started a company, AIM7, and that's literally what we do. It's a free app, but we've taken and democratized this information, and we deliver it in very highly engaging videos, because people love content. We do it in blogs, but it's all inside the app. But that's what I did. I saw the need. There's a lot of great information, and science is moving so fast, just like innovation is moving so quickly. So many journal articles are being put out. You've got to be able to filter through what's good and what's not. And so that's what I did. I just literally built, you start a company to solve a problem, right? So that's what AIM7's doing, is we're helping people that care about their health and well-being, but are time poor and need a simple solution. So I'll literally deliver that in like a 90-second video. And then we'll push you a little nudge when the sun comes up to go out and see the sun. And so, yeah, that's what it's all about. Is like, so some of the places I look, Science Daily is a website. I'm obviously scouring the latest journals to understand things, and I'm trying to bring it down to something that's digestible. But yeah, that's my solution, is to democratize it through technology.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we're already 5 minutes over time. I want to ask your permission. Can I ask each panelist to share what they're most curious about legally right now as the final question? Is that good with you guys?
Most curious legally?
Good. Eric, starting with you.
Most curious legally. Well, this is maybe a bit more of a macro question. My background was actually as a corporate restructuring and bankruptcy lawyer before I joined Legility. And legally speaking, and this kind of ties into what you were talking about before, I'm curious as to what the commercial real estate market is going to look like, and what cities are going to look like over the next 20 years, because I think there's going to be a really, really interesting time as a lot of these orphan buildings and stuff probably have to be repurposed, or they have to be torn down. But in tearing them down, these big office parks that we can look at in every city, I live in Nashville, they're everywhere there too. Those are going to be parks and civic land. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting time to live because of the transformation. And so it's tangential to legal, but the restructuring lawyers are going to have a lot of stuff to do over the next 20 years, and I think it's going to be interesting.
Get your breweries in there. Come on, we know.
We've got a few. They're in Alabama. We're looking for some other states too. We're in 4 states, so yeah, that's amazing. Definitely a topic for later.
Yeah. Eric.
Yeah, what's the brewery called?
Good People Brewing Company and Avondale Brewing Company.
Good People in Avondale.
Yeah,
awesome.
2 different breweries.
Legally right now, I don't have a whole lot on my mind legally, but I try to hire good lawyers, and let them think about that, and let them ask me the good questions like you guys said earlier. But data is something that's on my mind, and being a good steward of it, using it in an appropriate way. And it's very interesting that you brought up the point about data lakes and data history. Like, that got me thinking, because as a sports scientist, we're always looking from a temporal standpoint, what happened here that led to this outcome. And so it's important to have a historical data set, but how far do I need, and when do I need to push delete? And so that's a very interesting thing to be thinking about.
Chris.
All right, great. Yeah, I think from my perspective, an employment perspective, I am very curious how to maximize inclusion and equity in this new world that we're going to be facing, because it's going to be critical to maintain that level of engagement, make sure that every employee is feeling that they're part of something bigger, that their opinion matters, and that can be conveyed whether you're sitting at your home communicating by Zoom or you're in person, and then making sure that the way in which employees have opportunities, are developed, are promoted through the organization is equitable, and that each has the same level of opportunity regardless of which work option they pick. I think these are going to be challenges that we're facing, and it's going to require some creative thinking on how we approach these types of topics.
Alvin.
Man, you stole my answer. Yeah. I'll throw a curveball. I was thinking like people. Just because, you know, you talked about appeasement earlier and kind of how we're developing these frameworks and how we work. That also brings a lot of optionality to folks who are looking at different opportunities. You know, do you want to work from home? Do you want to work remote? Do you want to have an opportunity to work in Colorado somewhere? Do you want to have the opportunity to work here? Do you want to, you know, what do you want to do? What type of industries do you want to serve? Do you want to deal with people issues? Like, the optionality is like endless because of this environment we've been in over the past 18 months. And I'm interested to see a year from now, does that optionality still exist? Or to your point, Claire, like, are we gonna lock it back down and everyone's gonna be back in person and it's gonna be just like it was 18 months ago? But right now, it feels like there are a lot of options and a lot of things that people can do to kind of get the thing that they want out of their career, out of their workplace, et cetera. I'm just interested to see how that evolves.
Adam.
And I'm most interested in artificial intelligence. I think what we've talked about today in terms of data and digital transformation, the next step in that is the application of AI, and whether it's understanding how the structures we have around data privacy, data residency, or explicit AI regulations such as the EU just proposed, where is that going to go? How is that going to block AI development? And how is that also going to unblock opportunities with data and application of AI? So I'm really excited to see, very curious, how companies will react and how policymakers will react around the use and development of AI going forward.
Amazing. As our panel, please join me in giving them a hand.